Hello, my friends, and welcome to What's Up. I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute, and this is the program where Gregg, Braden, and I get together for a half an hour and talk about whatever's on our mind. Hi, Gregg. How are you?
John, I am beyond awesome. It's the end of the year. It's the end of the year. I'm coming to you from our studio outside of Santa Fe. Man, it's a big world. There's a lot going on. We started this conversation when you would pick me up at the airport, and
Right.
we'd have a 2 hour talk. And we always used to say, "Man, what if we could record this?" And so that was the
Yeah.
birth of
Yeah.
where we are right now.
So what's up? What you
Well,
been?
there's obviously a lot on my mind. So much going on in the world. I have been really drawn in the last few weeks, for whatever reason, on my radar. The idea of prophecy has been popping up, and how the events of the world seem to be playing into and supporting a number of ancient prophecies, and how some in the religious groups, in the fundamentalist groups, are actually working toward violent events they believe are necessary to fulfill the prophecies.
Yeah.
And what has come to me, the question that keeps coming up, a prophecy does not mean something that must happen. It is
Mhm.
something that an individual in the past peered down a timeline into the future and saw events unfolding. And if nothing changes those timelines, then maybe those events will unfold. But the question that's coming to me is, what if we break a prophecy? What if we break those prophecies? Do we have to have the violent events happen in order to achieve 1,000 years of peace, for example, in some of the religious traditions? Or when we look at the Hopi prophecies, they say there's a point of no return. There's a series of petroglyphs on a rock on one of the Hopi mesas, and it shows humankind on a path where we're all on the same path. And then something happens, and some of us choose one path, and some choose another path. One path is a very short path, it ends abruptly, and the other path is a longer path that actually continues around the side of the boulder and shows rich agricultural,
Yeah.
corn is growing, people are living to advanced ages. And what they say is there's a point of no return, where once you make that choice, you can't go back. My question and my sense, and what I want to ask you about, we are always told we've got free will. If we're in this simulation, or whatever it is we want to call this world we're living in, that we have free will. Once we are aware of our free will, do we and can we use that free will to break those prophecies that foretell of so much suffering, so much hurt, so much destruction, yet still achieve a beautiful outcome that comes on the other side of that destruction? Or is there some cosmic law that
Mm.
says you've got to go through these things in order to achieve that beautiful world that we know is possible? Do you
My,
have any thoughts about that, John?
yeah, my guess is it's a combination of both, as a matter of fact. I think that there are some kind of learning experiences that seem to be kind of baked into the cake, or some major kind of events are that you got to work your way through in order to be able to see yourself and you see the world in a larger way. And so in one sense, it's uh life without problems is boring, and you don't learn anything. It's the events of the stressful events that show up in our life that give us the chance to figure out how to do things better and do things better. And so I think that some of these things, certainly in Martin Armstrong kind of cyclical kind of terms, I mean, or Terence McKenna, Time Wave Zero, and the novelty, and so on. There's a fractal kind of underpinning that we operate on top of, that you kind of got to deal with. The other kind of component of this, though, is that I've come to the conclusion that that free will isn't everything it's cracked up to be. That is to say that you may have an opportunity or the latitude to make decisions, but every one of us are making decisions within a constrained environment, within a constrained space. And so what you have are, you're limited to those kind of options that are presented to you. The example that I give is that you come up to a four-way stop and you can go to the right or to the left, or you can go forward, but you can't go up and you can't go down. I mean, you're constrained to the environment that you're in. And that in, you know, if you expand that idea more broadly, then there are a lot of, shoot, you don't have any idea what this kind of, who's giving you the ideas in your brain that they're influencing the direction that you're going. Certainly there are any number of sources that we know of that can do that and generate that kind of influence. Who all I know is what I think I know is that there are a lot of constraints. We operate within a defined and constrained system, and that within that space there are rules, and that because there, it's not a space with no rules. It's a space with rules. That's what defines it. And so within that, then you got to play the game, the rules of the game. You can't go sideways on a football field and make a touchdown. You got to go to one end or the other one. I mean, it's just the way things work. And so we may think, I think I think you've got a chance to make more decisions than most people understand. I think that the system is much broader and unconstrained than most people understand. And so there is a lot of growth to happen within that space to learn how to play that. But nevertheless, it's ultimately constrained.
No, I agree 100%, John. We say free will. I think we have a tremendous number of options that we may choose from, and ultimately those options are finite in nature.
Free choice is a better term, by
It
the way.
is, and I like that. That is a better term. But, and I agree. I think there are the experiences that the prophecies have shown that we go through are the opportunities for us to arrive at an understanding regarding ourselves and our relationship to the world, and an understanding and a way of being that reflects those understandings. It's all about frequency. And my understanding, the physics of time, time is still one of the great mysteries in physics. We have such a poor understanding of what time actually is. It appears to be directly related to frequency. So if going through the suffering and the hurt and the loss drives us to a point where we arrive at some understanding that is a powerful frequency, that frequency is going to determine where we are on that timeline. So my question is, now that we are understanding the deep truth of who we are, can we arrive at those frequencies without going through that suffering? Can we choose to become those frequencies and those? And so in other words, I watched a television series recently. It's a really good TV series. The title is simply called Dig, D-I-G. It revolves around, a lot of it was filmed in Jerusalem, and it revolves around the idea that the third temple must be built on the Temple Mount. The third temple of Solomon, the first two were destroyed before certain prophecies can come to pass. And there are religious groups that were working in different parts of the world to accelerate that process. They wanted that to happen, and then there were others that didn't want that to happen. And so it was interesting because some of them were Christian groups, fundamentalist Christian groups. Some of them were there are Islamic groups that believe that certain things must come to pass so that we can move into this new world of peace. And it's a really well done. Characters are very well developed, but it really triggered the thought process. What if we circumvented all of that? Do we have the knowledge? We have the understanding. We have the free will within the constraints of what we have. What if we become those frequencies that align us with that timeline where we achieve a beautiful world, but we avoid all of that suffering? What are the consequences of invalidating those prophecies? What are the consequences of
Yeah.
invalidating the religious implications of those prophecies?
Prophecies are scenarios, right? Prophecies are these ideas, this logical kind of extension out to a possible future that these day and ages we call them scenarios. And the whole purpose of scenario planning, as you've alluded to in terms of prophecies, is to present you with a panoply, with a spectrum of possibilities so that you can choose which one you want and say, I don't want that one to happen. And so that you change your behavior such that this is what we did at Y2K. I ran around all over the place, probably more than almost anybody else, talking about the scenarios associated with the collapse of Y2, of the computers in the year 2000. As it turns out, when it came down to the day, not much happened, and everybody said, you guys were all stupid. You didn't know what you're talking about. And I said, they spent $350 billion rebuilding the whole computer infrastructure, and they did it all because we presented with them with a picture of what is going to happen if they didn't do it. And as it turns out, by the way, there was a couple of fracking, but not fracking, but the distillation plants and other kind of things that in fact collapsed because and locked up because they hadn't done the stuff. And so that's the whole idea. The idea is that here's what's likely to be if you keep doing what you're doing. And I mean, you've talked about that. Penny has talked about that. But what Penny talks about is consciousness is causal. And she and William Levin worked on how your mind and your ideas influence the plasma field that then turns into mass or into tangible kind of reality. That just everybody that's any kind of an expert in Neville Goddard in manifestation, all of these guys are all saying, sure, you can change about anything that you can. You can change the weather, you can change the war, the possibility of wars, all of it. If you just get enough people, I've come to the conclusion that you probably can't just do it by, maybe theoretically you could do it by yourself, but it really is a whole lot easier if you can get a few people together and trained.
I was just reading some statistics, and I didn't know where we're going to go with this, so I don't have it in front of me. But there was a scientific paper that was trying to come up with some way to quantify this. One individual with a clear quantum outcome embodied in their awareness, in their consciousness, offsets 7 million fear-based visions of our future. And this is why this conversation, I think, is important to me. Well, it is why it was important, why I think this is why it was coming up, because so much of the energy is focused on the dark things that must happen. The religious groups are all preparing for the tribulation and the end times prophecy, believing that must happen because of the good things on the other side. And Muslim groups are doing the same thing, and people are saying, it's right here in the book of Revelation. It's right here in the Bible. Well, Revelation, written by the prophet John, he was on the island of Patmos. He was essentially a remote viewer looking from his
Right.
point in time down a timeline of what very, very possibly could happen if nothing changed that timeline. Or, Nostradamus was looking 3,000 years into his future,
Yeah.
remote viewing down those timelines. What the math shows that when we're talking about frequency, it doesn't take much to shift that frequency to move the mark on the outcome of that timeline. A little change.
Oh,
We've used
very,
this example before.
very
If
small.
yeah, if you're firing a rocket from the Cape to the moon, and it's off a little bit, the angular trajectory is off just a little bit here. By the time you extrapolate that and you get to the moon, you're off by miles. Well, if that's a timeline of something frightening, a little shift here, by the time you get to the event, could be off by miles. 2012, I think, was a really good example of that. So many, some of these were colleagues and friends who are remote viewers and have worked in the industry, were really concerned because they could not see anything beyond 2012, and they didn't have any way to explain that. They didn't have any way to say
Yeah.
what is happening other than there's nothing there. They just said, and so that's where the story came that the world ends. Well, what I think they weren't able to do, they weren't able to compensate for a shift. The timeline they were looking at ended, and we have now adopted
Mhm.
a different timeline. And I think that's a part of what we're all looking at right now. So this was a question that came up after seeing the film and certainly talking to friends. Many of them are deeply entrenched in the religious prophecies. Uh, and some of them believe it would be sacrilege if we did not fulfill those prophecies.
Yeah. There's a dark side of that whole thing, and that is that there are people in the military who buy that point of view, so much so that they are working from within the system. So I've been told by very authoritative people, working within the system to try to precipitate and accelerate the war of all wars. And in particular, they are very concerned about the UFO problem or issue because they think that they're demonic and that they're trying to organize the military in order to fight off the
Mm.
alien attack that's supposed to come. And uh, anyway, it's
Well, this is where the whole conversation on the UFOs or UAPs, or whatever we want to call it, where this comes in, because once we've already acknowledged, I mean, it's already happened. We've already had the acknowledgement. It just depends on what level, to what degree people want to see that acknowledgement. But we've acknowledged we've got the craft, and we've acknowledged we've got the beings that were piloting the craft. So that means we have the propulsion systems, and we know they weren't V8 engines from a Ford F-150
yeah,
driving those craft, which means we have to acknowledge then that we have a way of creating energy that frees us from the bonds and the shackles of the economic and the economic principles and the lobbyists that have kept humankind enslaved for so very long. The revelation of those kinds of propulsion systems and the implications could be a trigger to offset those wars that are prophesized and predicted, because many of them are based on energy, based on oil.
yeah. You make an interesting point that whether it's Marty Armstrong or Cliff High or any of a number of other folks, they all talk about secrets revealed, that we're
Mm.
moving into a space, into an area, a time when there are secrets that are going to be revealed that are going to be extraordinary catalysts for influencing the change going forward. And let me tell you, and I don't know specifically what they are, that's for sure. I'm not telling you any secret here, but there are things that are under the table that will blow your socks off, that nobody has ever, common people don't understand, certainly in terms of energy devices and communications devices and other kinds of things. And, when somebody in the government who has access to those secrets suddenly is not getting paid because the American people are not paying their taxes, and they're having to have sh- sh- fire or lay off or shut down whole big pieces of the government, then we have a analog about what happens, and it was in Russia, and that's what happened. That's when the guys who had the nuclear weapons and everything started to say, what have I got that's got value, and what can I turn into some liquidity so that I can pay, so I can feed my family and so on. And you have the distinct possibility going forward, uh, that you've got all kinds of things that have come out that could really send this thing off in quite a different direction.
I agree. And if again, I like the simulation theory, John, from the sense that it gives us a vocabulary to describe in modern terms where we are and the events that are unfolding in the world that certainly parallel many of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions, but it allows us to have that conversation without a lot of the baggage that goes with it, and without a lot of the judgment and the rights and the wrongs and the sin and all those other things. So when I think about this conversation from that perspective, here we are in this simulation, and we're moving down this timeline, and there are certainly dark possibilities that may unfold. But what a beautiful outcome if we awaken to the fact that we can choose such a different outcome, and we get on the other side of that simulation, and we look at ourselves on the other side and say, my God, we came so close to doing the unthinkable. And maybe this is one of the drivers. But it's all about frequency. So this is the thing. If we make those choices of peace out of the love that we have for ourselves and our families and our world, and the beautiful things that we can create and build and achieve together, that's very different than making those choices out of the fear and the anger and the hate and the rage of what happens if
Absolutely.
we don't. So there's two things happening. There are the physical manifestations of whether we go to war or not. So the prophecies talk about a great army from the north that descends onto Israel, for example. That's interpreted as being Russia and Iran, Syria, Lebanon descending onto Israel, fighting the other forces. If we bypass that from the love of what we know is possible, that we together can create great and beautiful things. We've done it in the past and we can do it again. That's so very different than maybe avoiding the war, but doing it because we're flat out scared and we're
Right.
angry and we're hateful. So there's two levels of this. It's the outward manifestation, but then the battle within us. And we're all casualties of the information war, fifth generational warfare, data coming at us, trying to sift through it. What's true, what's not, what makes sense, what's not, what's healthy, what's harmful. So I think our role right now is to find our way through this fray, to navigate with what I call a soul compass. And there are certain values and parameters we have to define for ourselves. If information asked us to hate another person or to judge someone else, it's probably not in our best interest. And and we've got to be able to discern where that information is coming from, because that's driving the frequency of the choices that are going to
Yeah,
determine where we are if we fulfill those prophecies or not. So I've that's been
I
on my
agree.
mind a lot the last couple of weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I think it it's an important kind of notion as we go forward, because as we just chatted about in the last episode of quartet that we just talked about, there are a lot of things that aren't going to work going forward, and There is a new world that's emerging, and by definition, it's new. It's not the same. So things are not going to work the same. And so, absent some thinking like this and some options, then it becomes very disconcerting and just unstabilizing to go into a space where it doesn't work the way you thought it worked and where it always worked before. And so we really need to, it's really critically important that we really explore, kind of work your way around, pushing the edges of the space, trying to figure out where's the new way forward, what's the configuration, how does it work, how could it be different, and so on. Otherwise, you get surprised, and the surprises in this case are really, really big surprises.
Yeah. Well, and John, it's so interesting you say that, because when I bring this up with a live audience, and I do this frequently, and I'll say to people, who wants a better world? And everybody raise their hand. I say, okay, what's that world look like?
Mm,
And the only way that 99.9% of the people can answer that question, and this is really critical, the only way they can answer it is by taking what they know about the world now and modifying
that's
that
right.
to fit a new idea, rather than letting that world go and identifying what would be meaningful and useful and healthy and beautiful in a new world and working toward that. It's taking the
Right.
same, it's kind of like a V8 engine. The truth is we haven't really had any innovations in internal combustion engines. We've got the same principle. Now it's been modified and refined and it's very efficient, but it's the same principle for 100 years now.
And
And it's kind of
same for
like,
jet engines, by the way.
oh, okay. Well, I didn't know that. You
Yeah.
had obviously are closer to that than I am, but it's that same principle that applies when we think about a new world. These aren't new ideas they're coming up with. They are revisions of the systems, and they're not even optimum. They're just saying, well, this would be better than that. We don't want this would be better than that. We've got a new world coming. And I think I agree with you. There are things that we do need to go through. And I think the reason for that, John, and I'll close with this. I think the reason we need to go through them is because we don't want to carry into the world that's ahead of us the hurt and the suffering that we and our ancestors experienced in the world behind us that we've all come from. This is generational hurt, generational suffering, and we are the generation now that can heal that. We've all heard the term the buck stops here. Well, we can say the hurt stops here with us, so that the new world that's being birthed doesn't carry that hate and that suffering. Otherwise, we're going to end up going through the same cycles and dealing with the same problems and the same wars and everything all over again. So I do think there are things that help us along that path. And as we awaken to the point where we recognize that, I also believe it's possible to transcend the hurt and the suffering without going through the wars to do it.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. The it's going to be an extraordinary time. You've got to kind of internalize this notion that it's going to be new and it's going to be different. And so you've got to search for and find and define and invent the newness, the new ways to do this, because otherwise, as you've just suggested, you'll get more of the same, because what we've got around us right now is a product of how we think
Yeah.
and how we organize ourselves, and what are the values and the presumptions and all kinds of things that are at the core of our outlook, and all of that needs to change.
Well, John, I appreciate the opportunity just to be able to talk to you, just to voice some of
Yeah,
these ideas. There aren't a lot of people I can have that conversation with. I appreciate you and the opportunity
yeah.
to do
Well,
this, and
thank
the
you.
the
Likewise.
Arlington Institute for making it possible, taking the time so we can have these conversations. And
Well, this
I
is a great thing, and our viewers, many of our viewers, send me notes and tell me how much they appreciate this, and so thank you for your time too, because you're a busy kind of guy.
Well,
So,
I am, but not too busy for this. This is top and at the forefront of my world right now. This is the last of these conversations, John, we'll have in 2023. So I wanted to just say thank you to you and Arlington Institute. My love to you and to our community. We are going to continue this into the new year, and I think it's a valuable conversation to have.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg, very much. And thank you all who are our viewers and listeners. We appreciate this very much. You can find out more about what we do at the Arlington Institute at arlingtoninstitute.org. We got a lot of programs. We got a speaker series where Gregg and Penny Kelly and many other, Dave Martin, come here and to our little resort town in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia. So we hope that you'll stay with us and come back, and we'll see you again in another couple of weeks. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye.